Joined now by the great Hoosier. How are you, sir?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for having me back, guys.
Absolutely, always a pleasure. Dustin Shooty with us as always as well. We were just finished up with Mike DeCourcy and was talking about basically how the Big Ten has gone from looking not good to really kind of deep. Not deep with great teams because they only have, I think, 2 teams in the top 25 right now. But I don't know that there's a team that can't beat somebody all the way down to Minnesota. And that means that's 13 out of 14 teams. Maryland is kind of on the borderline there, so maybe 12. But, man, this league is 12 deep of solid teams because if Indiana's at the bottom of that and Illinois is at the bottom of that, I know that they're better than that. So this league has gotten a lot better than I thought that they were and were going to be, which makes it difficult for teams like Indiana because their next trip is up to Illinois. And I think that they need to win. We were just talking about the next 3 games the Hoosiers have at Illinois, at home against Michigan State, and then on the road at Minnesota. I think they need to win 2 out of those 3 games, even though that's a tough ask because one of those is at Illinois.
Yeah, no doubt. And this is a situation that Indiana created for themselves when they proceeded to drop 4 out of their first 5 Big Ten games. Unfortunately, signs of life from the IU defense against Wisconsin. It's always going to be a slog against that style of basketball. But it was in my estimation, it was their best defense performance of the year, which is going to, as you saw, for what was not necessarily the prettiest offensive output, puts them in a position to win the game and win they did pretty handily. They've got to find a way to take that on the road now. They've got to find a way to replicate that. Honestly, throughout the remainder of this month, if they want to position themselves for a decent tournament seed, not to mention a bid, but also to regain a little bit of the reputability that was lost over the course of December and some of the stumbles they had. But as we talked about last week, this stretch is absolutely crucial for setting the table for what's going to be an absolute gauntlet come February. And I think it would be disappointing to drop the next 2 or 2 out of the next 3 because, as we've discussed before, the degree of difficulty gets so much tougher. The hill gets a whole lot steeper once February starts with really no reprieve. So hopefully Indiana can take some key learnings from what that defensive intensity can deliver them. And hopefully they can package that up and take it on the road and go remind Mr. Chester Frazier exactly what happens when the Hoosiers come to Spaceship Assembly Hall, as he's tweeting about a game 15 years ago last night.
That Indiana won, which was bizarre to me. But whatever, teach their own. Don't let me yuck anybody's yum here. So one of the things that you just brought up and we just got done talking about is it kind of speaks to the margin of error and how thin it is for Indiana right now, because if they win 2 out of the next 3, they go to 4-5. And after starting the Big Ten season with a 1-4 record, you're feeling pretty good heading into, like you said, heading into a much more difficult schedule. You lose 2 out of those 3 and you're 3-6. And you're wondering about your tournament resume at that point. So it's, to me, this might be the most pivotal stretch. I don't want to call them must-win games just yet, but I feel like this is a pivotal stretch for Indiana the rest of the season.
No, you very much have the feeling right now, even though Indiana's got some good wins on their resume, I don't know that they are squarely a bubble team at this point. I think most bracketologists have them pretty safe from the bubble, but recognizing what those strings of losses can do once you start stacking them up, once you start putting those into a pattern over the course of the season. And that's something that this team has struggled with in the past. It's something that they've already demonstrated they're capable of doing this year. And you cannot allow that to repeat. You've got to find a way to arrest a slide before a 1 game becomes a 2, becomes a 3, becomes a 4 game losing streak, because that's absolutely how you're going to sink your tournament chances. And for a team that had so much promise to start, obviously the injuries play a big factor into how Indiana got to where they are right now. I don't want to dismiss any of that. I think it's unrealistic for folks to bemoan the team's current position without, acknowledging the reality of losing 2 out of your 5 starters, 2 senior leaders. The thing for me that stood out was, how well Trace was able to lead, particularly on the defensive end. I thought he was far more aggressive than what we've seen. But the sudden maturation of Jalen Hood-Schifino and how critically important that's going to be, that IU's got a cool head in the backcourt that can run the stuff and set the tone for Mike Woodson. And that's just going to become even more paramount as you start going on the road, as you start playing. That Michigan State-Purdue game last night was just an absolute, I guess yesterday, not last night, was a great matchup, but just showed, how incredibly difficult it is to win in any gym in this league on any given night. Anybody can take you to the cleaners if you're not watching, and you've even got to watch the Minnesotas. I think a lot of teams smell there's blood in the water when Indiana is on the schedule, and whether or not they look like they're worth anything, they're going to come for Indiana because they sense weakness. That's just what Indiana's record brings about from opponents. They feel a sense of opportunity. So Indiana's going to have to be highly cautious and highly aggressive, but also highly focused. And they're going to have to start stacking some W's together. I don't know that there's really going to be a realistic shot at the Big Ten title this year, seeing as the hole they've dug themselves. But you certainly want to play for seed line, and you absolutely have to play for that bid come Selection Sunday.
Yeah, I don't see any shot at the Big Ten title, but that's irrelevant. There are bigger things to achieve, and of course, what you can do in the NCAA tournament, and don't forget the Big Ten tournament. But this team is one that has to. It's had to have been forced to change gears, no doubt. The injuries have played havoc with this team. I mean, you lose your best on-ball defender, and it's going to affect them. Anyone would be crazy to say otherwise. You lose a Race Thompson, it's going to affect you. I don't care who you are, because guys like Jordan Geronimo just were not prepared to just step right in. And Malik Renew was not prepared just to step right in. Now, after last game for Jordan Geronimo, hopefully that gives him the confidence to show him that he can be that player, and they need that player. I've said it over and over here with other people, whether it's Jordan Geronimo, it's Trey Galloway, or Tamar Bates. One of those guys has to step up every game for this team to win. It cannot win with just Jalen Hood-Schifino and Trey Jackson-Davis having good games. Someone else is going to have good offensive games, or a combination of those guys for Indiana to win, and especially when you go on the road. I think Jordan Geronimo is probably the most likely of those three, because he's shown that he can do it, and he just needs the confidence, I think, to know that he can play like that game in, game out in this league.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, it was absolutely awesome to see Geronimo really find a groove and find a way to stay on the floor and continue to make contributions. But I think what's paramount for these guys, obviously, you're going to lean heaviest on your big horses and Trace and on Hood-Schifino, but the imperative nature of having everybody that's getting minutes find ways to contribute. Geronimo doesn't necessarily have to have a double-double every game. But, for a guy that's currently averaging a little less than 6 points on the season, you got to be able to find a way to get to your averages. Trey Galloway, he doesn't necessarily always need to get double figures, but he's averaging almost 7 points a game. You don't want to see them dipping below those averages, because it puts more onus on everybody else to pick up that slack. I'm probably most focused on Miller Kopp finding a way back into making pretty significant contributions, because for the better part of the season, he's been one of IU's most reliable scorers. The same thing can be said for Tamar Bates. especially in Xavier Johnson's absence. All those guys that are getting minutes have got to find a way to play up to or above their averages, because there's going to be games. Fortunately against Wisconsin, Trace didn't have that dominant post. He wasn't getting a lot of really effective traps, and he was able to work. That's not going to be the case for the majority of the remainder of the Big Ten season. They're going to throw the kitchen sink at Trace and make everybody else beat them. So these guys have got to find a way when their number is called to go out there and make contributions. And it's not always in scoring. Defensively, I think as we saw, that's going to be it for Indiana. Indiana is not a team that's really built right now to get into a shooting match with a high-powered offense. Not that they can't score, but that's just not this team's path to victory on most nights. So you got to do it defensively, but you got to, all the effort plays, whether it be rebounding, boxing out, the little stuff, the intangibles, screening, cutting. This team has to do a lot of little things at a better level in order to give them a greater chance going forward, I think, especially with the diminished capacity.
And defense stands at the top of that, Dustin.
Well, and that's what I was going to bring up. Chronic, you said that we got to see Indiana travel a little bit better, and that's the one thing. It's the old coaching cliche, like defense travels. You can always control your effort on that end of the floor, but at times it's felt like Indiana really hasn't been that good defensively on the road. So I'm interested. I think one of the intriguing aspects of this game on Thursday is, did they find something defensively against Wisconsin? Can that serve as that watershed moment where finally they say, you know what, maybe we're not shooting the ball that great, but if we play defense the way we did against Wisconsin, we can hang with anybody in the Big Ten. We can kind of control our own destiny here. So that to me is going to be very interesting, because I think part of it is I think that they got away a little bit from what they were so successful with last season. And then I think part of it is, as you talked about, when you lose 2 of your 5 starters and you have to change the rotations, you got a new starting 5. It takes a few games at least to find that chemistry for those guys to gel. So I'm really interested. Did they find something in that Wisconsin game that they can then take on to Illinois and maybe manufacture some success on the defensive end?
Yeah, and I'd be a little cautious of reading too much into the defensive effort against Wisconsin, because I thought the effort was there. Don't get me wrong. I'd probably better put the reading too much into the outcome. Wisconsin is actually one of the conference's least effective offenses.
Sure.
And they just don't have the firepower. They don't have the athleticism that Indiana's going to see against most opponents. But for me, it was the engagement. It was the connectedness of the defense. It was very clear that they came in sharp, focused, and hungry to get after it on that end of the ball. And, I really loathe doing this because I think it's absurd that you for a lot of fans, it's difficult to praise the Indiana women's team without taking a dump on the men's team. But after watching the Maryland we just played, seeing how well the women have been able to absorb the injuries, the absences that they've been faced with for a team that runs a much, much tighter rotation than what the men do, and the way that they've been able to keep things together without really lusing their identity in the process, without having to remake themselves. I think that was absolutely imperative to them being able to sustain the winning that they had during both Grace Berger's absence as well as Kendra Brown's. So if the men can figure that out, and it's really the guys coming off the bench, it's the guys that are being asked to step into the starting roles, that next man up philosophy, I know it's cliche as all get out, but it really has to be Indiana's mindset going forward, because make no mistake, you're going to see games where Trace gets frustrated and the output's just not there, where Fino shows more of his freshman side, where the whistles are going to get really, really disproportionate and really, really ridiculous. Not like we're not already accustomed to that, but that's just what happens in the Big Ten, especially when you go on the road. That's going to happen. How do you respond? That's the one thing that you control in every situation. It's how do you respond to that adversity? And it's going to take a lot of maturity, and I think it's going to take the young guys, maturing and kind of getting that thicker skin and that toughness when they go in some of these hostile environments and they face some difficult situations if they expect to pull some wins out here.